Everyone around you is losing their mind. Your social media is flooded with flags, predictions, and highlight reels. Your coworkers are talking about last night's match. Your family has gathered around the TV with snacks and jerseys. And you're sitting there, genuinely, completely unbothered. Not pretending, not being difficult, just not feeling it. And at some point today, someone looked at you like you were missing something fundamental about being human. You're not missing anything. Your brain is just wired differently. Today, we're going to talk about the psychology of people who don't care about the World Cup. Not in a dismissive way, in the specific, neurologically real, research-backed way that explains why some brains are simply not built to find meaning in spectator sports, and why that's not a character flaw. It's a feature. Let's start with why most people care so intensely, because understanding the pull is the only way to understand the absence of it. Human beings are tribal creatures. For hundreds of thousands of years, survival depended on belonging to a group. The emotional systems that evolved to support tribal belonging are still running in every human brain right now. Sports, and specifically international tournaments like the World Cup, tap directly into these ancient tribal systems. When millions of people paint their faces and scream at screens, they are not being irrational. They are experiencing genuine neurological activation of tribal bonding systems. Research from Oxford University found that watching sports together synchronizes the heart rates of fans in the same room, a biological marker of genuine social bonding.
The oxytocin released during shared sporting experiences is the same bonding hormone released between mothers and newborns. This is not enthusiasm. This is ancient biology doing exactly what it was designed to do. So why doesn't it work for everyone? Research from the University of Chicago suggests that individual differences in dopamine receptor sensitivity significantly predict how much a person cares about competitive spectator activities. People with certain genetic variants of the D4 receptor simply don't receive the same neurological reward from watching competition that others do. The dopamine hit that makes millions of people jump off their couches simply doesn't arrive. And if the reward isn't there, the interest won't be either. Not because of indifference, because of neuroscience. But there's more to it than just dopamine. People who don't care about the World Cup tend to share some specific psychological characteristics. The first is what psychologists call low tribal instinct identification. Most sports fans experience a genuine psychological merger with their team. When their team wins, they say, "We won." When their team loses, they say, "They lost." This pronoun switch reveals how deeply sports fans identify with their team as an extension of themselves. People who don't care about the World Cup typically don't experience this merger. Their identity remains stable regardless of what happens on the pitch. They don't need external collective victories to feel good about themselves. The second characteristic is what researchers call direct engagement preference. People who don't care about spectator sports don't lack passion. They lack interest in parasocial investment, the one-sided emotional relationship with people and teams who will never know they exist. Research shows that non-sports people prefer to invest their emotional energy where there is actual reciprocity, where their care changes the outcome, where they are participants rather than spectators. This is why people who don't care about the World Cup are often deeply invested in things that demand their actual participation: creative projects, personal relationships, intellectual challenges. They're not less passionate than sports fans. They're passionate about different things where they're not in the audience. The third characteristic is novelty sensitivity in meaning-making. For sports fans, the power of the game comes from its unpredictability. That uncertainty keeps the dopamine flowing, intermittent reinforcement at its most powerful. But for some people, the uncertainty of sport feels meaningless rather than compelling. They think, why would I invest emotional energy in an outcome I can't influence, performed by strangers, in a game that doesn't affect my actual life? This
this isn't cynicism. It's a different relationship with what counts as meaningful. Research from 2021 in the Journal of Personality found that people with low sports interest score significantly higher in openness to experience. They seek meaning in art, ideas, relationships, and personal growth, rather than in collective narrative and competitive outcome. Now, here's something interesting that almost nobody talks about.
The World Cup creates a very specific kind of social exclusion for people who don't share the interest. Not aggressive exclusion, ambient exclusion. The kind where conversations happen around you that you can't enter, where shared references pass over your head, where the assumption is that, of course, everyone cares, so nobody explains why it matters, and you're left perpetually outside a social ritual that seems to bind everyone else together. And this can genuinely feel lonely, not because you wish you cared, but because caring is the entry ticket to a form of social connection that happens to be everywhere during a World Cup. But here's what's worth knowing. The people who don't get swept up in the World Cup are often the people most present in their own lives during it. While millions of people are experiencing someone else's victory or defeat, the non-sports person is engaged in their own story, their own challenges, their own creative and relational life. There is something quietly radical about that, about declining to outsource your emotional life to a competition you didn't enter. Studies on autonomous motivation consistently find that people who don't follow sports report higher levels of personal agency, higher sense of control over their own emotional states, greater tendency to find meaning in direct experience rather than vicarious experience.
You're not missing something. You're simply not wired for that particular form of belonging. And the belonging you do seek, the direct, reciprocal, participant kind, is arguably the harder and more rewarding version. So if everyone around you is wearing jerseys and you're sitting quietly with your own thoughts, you're not broken. You're not cold. You're not missing the point. You just find your meaning somewhere else, and that somewhere else is worth exactly as much as any stadium in the world. Hit subscribe if this finally explains something about yourself that you've been unable to articulate in a room full of sports fans. And if you want to understand why some people are wired for depth over noise in every area of their lives, that video is next. Because not caring about what everyone else cares about isn't always a flaw. Sometimes it's a clue to who you really are.